Welcome back to Dr. Akmal Makhdum's YouTube channel. Today we are discussing the coronavirus and managing the madness. Welcome and thank you for taking the time out to explain to us how can we manage ourselves in such a precarious time. Right now we're seeing everyone is going through some stress, that people are stockpiling, no one knows what's happening. Leading on from our last conversation about the general psyche of the virus, what would you say are the behaviors people are showing at the moment?
There are, as usual, various behaviors in different contexts of society. And what we see is that in societies where you have young people, they have not paid too much heed because they know that it is not affecting young people. So it's generally sparing of children, invariably sparing of infants, and it doesn't have much impact on the very young. And somehow it is just culling the elderly. And that is why you see that in Italy, where they have actually surpassed in numbers of deaths compared to China,
Highest in the world currently.
the highest at this moment, because it has a very high old population. And as anecdotes suggest, that it actually spread in old people's residential homes, and they're falling all over the place. And so somehow it is creating a natural balance to the population in terms of sparing the young and killing the elderly. So I think that people have become slightly aware of that. And so young people are less caring about it. And the older people are obviously more scared.
Right.
The elderly are the ones who are housebound. Generally, they seem to be keeping stuff at home. Obviously, they need to. But then there is that extreme elderly population which really doesn't have the access or the resources. So, what I would suggest is that we need to cater for that particular group of elderly people.
So, as you've mentioned, that it is having a higher mortality effect on the elderly. And the young people seem to be a little blasé with their attitudes.
Yeah.
However, we are still seeing the young people are going into the stores, even in countries like England, clearing the shelves of certain essential items, not really leaving much behind for people who may really need it. We're seeing pictures in the papers of elderly people standing there looking at empty shelves. So that's a contradiction in their behavior too, because they're being very carefree comparatively. They're still going out, but they're also then preparing and taking all the essentials away from people who may need it.
I wouldn't term it in such stark
Right.
terminology. Or what I would say is that young people may be hoarding some things, but I would say that it is far more the fitter old people who are doing it. We may see a picture of one elderly person looking at it, but that doesn't make as if that's what the general trend is. What I've seen is that people who are older are taking more care, and the younger are still going to their pubs, and they are the ones traveling around. They are the ones, filling the underground tubes and so on. And until yesterday, they were all over, concerts and this, that, and the other in their own gatherings. So this is what is happening. But what I would like to also mention is that, as we discussed last time, the cultural context, what you see is that in the uneducated and cultural and religious societies, even the educated are behaving in this manner. And in this uneducated manner, we hear in Pakistan people absolutely positive with the virus are going into parties, they are resisting self quarantine, there's no concept of social distancing, and everything is going as if there is,
It's a vacation.
yeah. And so people have started going to hill stations and their gatherings and so on. Gatherings have moved into homes, and then there are bits where you know that one person is able to or has infected 10, 20, 30 people. Those 10, 30 people or 20, 30 people are going to infect hundreds of people, and those hundreds will affect hundreds of thousands of people. So again, we are coming to that societal attitude that where you have this attitude about, that fatalistic attitude, everything is in the hands of God, so it doesn't matter, I may or may not take any care, if it's written, it'll happen. It is as if, jumping into a well and hoping for the best, or setting yourself on fire and hoping for a miracle that you won't be burnt. So that's what we are seeing. We are not seeing this kind of behavior. We are not seeing this kind of these statements and this fatalistic attitude in modern contemporary societies.
I would like to. Okay, that's a fair enough. That's another point adding to what we've already seen. But in countries like Italy, France, Germany, the government has taken drastic steps in order to stop concerts, stop people from going into public places. Cinemas have been shut down, etc. So we've talked about Pakistan, we've talked about the cultural, religious, education factor. But let's bring it to England, because that is one thing we are actually seeing within the young people here, is that they're still going to their clubs. That is now what are in the reports. So we're talking about this education, but does it really even matter? Because even in England, you have the pubs are still going. Cinemas, yes, they were more running at half capacity, but they're still going. Gyms are still active. Yes, they're fine. They're cutting it down, but people are still doing what, as you would say in quote unquote, educated people in Pakistan are doing. So what would you say about that?
What I would say is that the difference between here and there, let's talk of England first. In England, I think that this is an informed choice, that the elderly are dying, the younger are spared, we are young, it's not going to affect us that much. None of the young people have been really, the younger generation hasn't been affected, and as a result, we should do that. But at the same time, I've seen young people shaking elbows or their feet. So the other day, I saw 3, 4 young people shaking feet rather than hands. There's no hugging, there is no intimate or other kind of public display of contact. Whereas I've been to a recent bereavement in a Pakistani community family, and where everybody was shaking hands, everybody was embracing each other, everybody was mixing as if nothing has happened. There were the elderly, there were the young, and so on. But
that's the informed choice, because they're within the UK.
I would say that is not the informed choice. I would still put it to the culture. And I would put it because this was a community where a lot of religious belief was inculcated and exists. And this was where all the religion was oozing out at that particular time.
However, just to clarify, but this is not a generalization. You're just picking up on little pockets.
I'm picking up a particular community in England, a particular type of community in England, because you know that the expatriate Pakistani Indian, Kashmiri, other communities have also got a huge range from the extremely educated to still extremely uneducated, an extremely primitive mindset, tribal mindset, and with Zat, Paat, Bradri, and all that, still very, very strong. And at times it is really scary because it is in a time warp. So, what I would again say is that there is no general approach. Each community has to be looked at in a particular manner because the message for one community is an entirely different effect on another community.
Right.
And as a result, what we see in England is that the Pakistani community is dealing with in a different manner. The Sikh community is dealing with in a much more organized manner, much more contemporary manner. The Hindu community is dealing with it in a varied manner, and I would say that we need to actually get into the community approach.
Right. So let's bring it back to your point that so the people going to the pubs, the young people, so that's the informed choice. So now I think let's jump ahead. We'll come back to other points that we can explore in different videos. But let's come back to the point because right now people are panicking. People are upset. They're confused. The media led them one way. Different. People read all sorts of news outlets. Everyone has kind of either been sensation. It's been either sensationalized or it has been. It's been clickbaiting people in order to get the ratings and all of that. But now you see a turn where they're criticizing the public who don't, majority of people are working. They cannot afford to self-isolate and not work. They have to pay bills. They have to put food on the table. So, you have a lot of people with platforms who have a lot of money who are able to self-isolate. How is people supposed to what are we supposed to do? Basically, because like you said, every community has a different approach.
Every community has a different approach as far as messages are concerned. I would say that you can create effective messages for the religious communities, for communities
so
which
who should be creating them?
Who should be
creating these messages?
I would say that community leadership, political leadership, and relevant local media should mix with the local community leaderships and members and then try to create something which is more relevant.
Right.
I have seen that a lot of Pakistani older women have zero idea about it except for fear, except for a curse from the Almighty. And the terminology which is being used was all because of evil and this, that, and the other, and a lot of attribution, a lot of projection, a lot of fatalistic attitude. The younger people are far more aware, but the religious communities are dealing with it in a fatalistic manner. Many people said, well, it's up to God. I'm not going to change my particular habits. I do my ablutions 5 times a day for prayers. That's enough for me. I'm going to be mixing with people. I'm not going to be rude and not shake hands and so on. Now, there is that quite a large chunk of people. So if those are affected and if that young person is affected and goes and hugs grandfather and grandmother, he is going to be without grandfather and grandmother in a few weeks' time. So that is where I feel that the older people are more vulnerable.
Okay, so then, like you said, it's up to community leaders, local government, etc., to come together. But you have this platform. What would you advise people who are from certain cultures where it's rude or they have religious factors? How can they? Because maybe they want to not shake hands and hug, but they're also got a lot of peer pressure.
But it is the language you use with them. For the religious community, which people's lives are underpinned by that belief system, you have to use that language. So wherever in the scriptures you see care, prevention. You see in various schools of thoughts about modern medicine, about treatment, about illness, how to manage illness, the sayings of the messengers of God, etc. These are the bits. You need to color your scientific message heavily with religious overtones.
So they have to do their research.
You have to, because that is the language that they understand. For women in particular, I believe that messages have to be in local language, because a lot of even middle-aged women in England who've lived all their lives, English is a difficult situation. So I would say that messages need to be clearly identified. And as I talked of Indonesia the other day, how they were able to deal with it, because very empowered and educated women folk and respect for authority. The problem with in societies like Pakistan and Pakistani communities is there isn't respect for authority. Although they are patriarchal, but there isn't respect for authority. The respect comes in each household from each household patriarch or maybe a matriarch. The matriarch is totally oblivious of what is going on. The patriarch is saying, I don't believe in these things. So by meaning respect for authority is not the respect for authority of a singular authority, which then pervades all across, because there are so many factions and each household is a cult in itself.
Right. That's very interesting. So now we only have a couple of minutes left. So this video is about managing the madness. You've already given some ideas for certain communities within the country to deal with it. We've talked about other countries, especially Pakistan. What would you say for everyone else? Like last time you also spoke about reflecting and critically looking at the situation and what, like as you mentioned, and a lot of people, some people wrote back to us and said, stockpiling toilet paper, what is that going to do? What, as a psychiatrist, what would your advice be? Because it is causing a lot of anxiety and stress internally. A lot of people don't believe in therapy or can't afford to go to therapy. They're not taking medication to manage such kind of imbalances within themselves. How do we handle this mental, psychological stress?
I would say that honest communication is first in this particular scenario. I've looked at the Pakistani community and Pakistan messages to the Pakistani society in general. And I do not think that they've really been spoken with a truthful overall picture. Nobody said that if 97% or 90% of the people of Pakistan, that's 220 million, out of that 190 million are affected, and of course, okay, let's take away 40, 50, 60% the younger population and just focus on the 30% of the vulnerable population, or even 20% of the population, and 3% of that 20% is going to be between 600,000 to 6 million. So if you're looking at 600,000 deaths, that could be wiping out a whole generation. That could be wiping out a whole set of knowledge base, a whole set of culture. And so I think that
History,
because not much is written. People don't write. And so that is the problem. That if you do that, if you allow that to happen, and nobody said that, I think that here, Boris Johnson was really, right on the button, and when he said thousands of people will lose loved ones, be ready for it. The Imperial College projection suggests, 250,000 deaths, if it keeps on going the way it is going. And of course, they are trying to look at that, the epidemiological curve, the spread curve, and how to have certain steps at certain points. This is what I see, which is lacking in public discussion. It is a very petty discussion which is going on. The discussion is, who's at fault? Who's at fault? And if this is the discussion, I'm looking at very dire and serious consequences for it. Because, okay, it'll be brilliant if it just touches Pakistani community and goes away, and it doesn't cause much damage, and only few deaths. But there is a potential, some people said probability, if not a possibility, of hundreds of thousands dying. And if that is the case, and if the degree of awareness and knowledge is so little, the degree of plain talking is so little. So when you say that the anxiety is a projection of unknown fears that you carry, and something triggers it, and then it goes haywire. So if you give a rough estimate of experts sitting, epidemiologists sitting, and they sit down and say, the way it is going, we project that in 2 months it'll be 20,000, or it'll be 200,000, and so on. But it may not go there, but you have to be careful. You have to do X, Y, and Z. If you do not do that, you're looking at a large chunk of this population ending.
Right. And also, but one final thing before we finish is that we're seeing, you mentioned about the experts and having a frank discussion. We've seen some people, the experts on TV, there are some talk shows, there are a lot of different platforms out there, but people are bickering and arguing with them, as the non-expert, and kind of putting their emotions and feelings there. So how is the general public supposed to get anything from that when you have the hosts and people projecting their own fears and anxieties onto the experts that are there to educate everyone?
I think that's up to the experts to say that, look, I can't deal with your psychological problems. You need to go and see a psychologist, or your grandfather who may not live that long to do that. What you need to do here is that you need to discuss with me what I know. I know that this vector, or this curve, or this trajectory is going to affect 5 million, kill 500,000, or whatever. So I think that you need to be that clear, because once there is a degree of clarity, people can then say, okay, we roughly are aware what the mortality is going to be. I may or may not be in that 250,000 who are predicted to die in England. And so it is now up to me whether I put myself in that 250 or I don't put myself in that 250.
Great. Thank you so much. And next time we will touch upon another element of handling the coronavirus. Thank you so much.